Welcome back to OkashiCon Online. This is the fourth Sunday of the month, and that makes this Japan Stories, our monthly travel program about traveling in Japan, arts, culture, and all kinds of other cool things. Today we have a very special presentation. It is kind of a double feature. We have both an interview and slides with information. Y'all have seen my slides. We don't have too many today, I promise. We're going to be talking about traveling in Japan with disabilities, although a lot of this information is also relevant to traveling anywhere around the world. Just because we are a Japan-themed show, don't assume that the information here is only relevant to Japan, but we have a lot of specific information coming for you. Before we get into that, I have a whole ton of announcements today because there's a lot going on with OkashiCon Online. As you may be aware, OkashiCon, the convention, will not be held live this year. We are having to push back to 2022 just for everyone's health and safety, but we will be having a special, I think it might be 8 hours long event on July 19th, which is one of the original OkashiCon dates, where we're going to have more guests from Japan, some authors, some food presentations, musicians. If you saw our New Year's Eve presentation, just imagine that, but double. We're going to have, Japan-related community things here in the Austin area. So we're going to have just a wonderful day exploring everything to do with Japan. Around about the time of the Olympics, remember, they're having a spectator-free Olympics in Japan this year for the 2020 Olympics, but we can still celebrate, hopefully, travel coming up, so we can, I think we're going to have a good time. Certainly, if you saw our New Year's Eve special, that was pretty awesome. You can still go back and watch that on the OkashiCon website or on YouTube. We've got 4 hours of amazing guests. So remember, if you have missed any of the previous programs from OkashiCon Online, you can go back and watch them on our YouTube channel. Certainly, all of my shows are available there. We have other things coming up throughout the month. I will say we have been on a bit of a hiatus for anime afternoons, but we are currently going to be opening applications. So if you have done a panel at another anime convention and you would like to present that online while cons are not happening in real life, please contact us and we would love to open up the forum for you. We've had a couple of presentations already in the past year and we would like to have more. So we want to get back into the anime afternoon spirit, but we need some content and we need your help for that. Also coming up on OkashiCon Online, tonight we have the Demo Disc OkashiCon guys playing Hunt Night. This is a special event. This is not their usual day of the month, but tonight from 7 p.m. And they usually go for many, many hours. So don't worry if you don't have to be there right there at 7 p.m. They are going to be gaming on our channel tonight. And I don't have any more information because they tend to be very funny and very off the cuff. So if you are into Hunt Night or if you're just into the Demo Disc guys in general, I would strongly recommend that you come this evening. Remember also that on the second Tuesdays of the month at 7:30 p.m. Central Time, I present Make Your Monday, which is a show about Japanese arts, crafts, cosplay, accessories, and more. And this coming May 10th is when I will be doing origami with a bit of a twist. It's going to be making origami jewelry and then also jewelry out of found objects. So like gachapon capsules or other tiny cute little things that you may have come across in your travels. It's going to be very simple and only minimal tools are needed. Please remember to subscribe to the OkashiCon mailing list, which there'll be a banner at the bottom which tells you where you can go sign up for that. We're going to try to have this up every month now, previewing the shows that will be forthcoming. And then also I have a personal mailing list for Make Your Monday, so feel free to contact me if you want the supply list in advance. Most people don't tend to do the crafting while we're live, but if you would like to and you want the supply list ahead of time, I can send you on that mailing list, which is separate. But Julian in Japan is the email that you can always contact me at. We also have coming up on May the 8th at the Floral Frills event, Floral Frill for All. This is the J Fashion, the Japanese fashion group, is having a Zoom meeting. This is the first time where there are no limits to the number of people who can come. And everyone's just going to be dressing up in their floral finery to celebrate May flowers and getting together, playing games, having a chat, and just generally, having a nice social activity that people can all get together and meet up on Zoom, since unfortunately, again, the J Fashion meetups haven't been able to be live and in person very often. Let's see what other announcements I have. I would like to remind you that we are on Twitch, which is for us a free platform. It is owned by Amazon, and that means that there are ads that run, so that's how they pay for our use of the service. If you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you can use your Amazon Prime account to subscribe to OkashiCon or any other Twitch channel, one Twitch channel of your choice, for free. So you won't see the ads. You won't have to sit there and watch. When the ads pop up, there's nothing we can do about it. It'll pop up differently for each one of you. And so you will miss what's happening while the ads are going live. So I just strongly recommend that if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber and you find ads annoying, please go ahead, sign up for a Twitch account, and then you can undersubscribe. You can subscribe with Prime. It doesn't cost you anything. It gives us a tiny little bit of money that we can use to support our programming. If you're not an Amazon Prime subscriber and you're like, why would I bother to sign up for a Twitch account? Today's program is going to be very interactive. I really want to make sure that I am giving you as much tailored and specific information as I possibly can. But the only way that works is if you sign up for a Twitch account and then you can comment live during the broadcast. I'm not going to be checking like my Facebook Messenger or text or anything. I really need you, if you have questions, sign up for a Twitch account and drop them in the Twitch chat, because that's the only way I can be sure that I'm going to have my eyes on them while we're doing this live broadcast. So I really would encourage you to do that. And I hope that I'll be able to answer your questions. I know that there's quite a few people who are coming who may not have popped in yet, who have very specific needs. And I would really like to address those issues that you have or concerns that you have about possibly going to Japan. Let me check the rest of and I think that is the majority of our announcements. Remember that if you do have friends or family who might be interested in going to Japan and have any type of impairment or mobility issues or chronic health issues, and you know that they may benefit from this information, this program is available on our YouTube after the broadcast. It does take up to an hour for YouTube to process it, but during that period, it is adding subtitles automatically. So if people are hearing impaired and need closed captioning, YouTube will add that for us automatically as soon as this broadcast ends, and then it'll show up on the OkashiCon YouTube channel when that is finished. So I think that is all of our announcements. Please remember, you can comment in the chat at any point. In fact, I strongly encourage you to. It's very helpful to know what you are interested in, and so that we can, gear the topics and adjust so that we meet your needs and your interests, and also so that I'm not sitting here just talking to a computer screen. One of the nice things about being live is that we can have a conversation, and I really like doing that. But y'all are probably tired of just listening to me ramble on at this point about OkashiCon in general, so let me get into today's topic. Today I have a very special guest. It's Josh Grisdale from Accessible Japan. Now, unfortunately, as we speak, it is 4:08 in the morning, Tokyo time, so Josh is not here with us live. I stayed up late to pre-record an interview with him and then edit it down. Josh and I get along very well, so we kind of rambled a lot, and I have condensed it down to the most essential information. So if you see any slight little skips or glitches, that's just my not very professional editing skills, but I wanted to cut out kind of the things that are repetitive or things that I'm going to mention later on in the program. I will say after the interview with Josh, then I'm going to get into my personal presentation. If there is only one thing that you take away from this program today, it is that if you're planning on going to Japan and you have any kind of disability or impairment, you need to go to accessible-japan.com. because pretty much everything that I've said you can find there, or I can tell you there because I am one of the members of that website. And certainly Josh is available to communicate with people. There's an entire forum, an entire community of people. So if you learn nothing else today, learn that that website exists and is a fantastic resource for you. However, I have been traveling to Japan for about 17 years. Josh has been going for 20 years. And we have been able to distill some of our experience. And I have a presentation that I'll be doing after the interview that's getting really into the nitty-gritty of things like equipment rental, medications, tips for traveling, tips for getting around big cities. All of that will be discussed after the interview. So please stick with us, and that is the time when I will be able to answer all of your questions. I will be watching the chat while the interview is playing, and I will be recording any questions that come up. So feel free, if you think of something while you're watching, feel free to drop a question into the chat, and then I will address that later. Or it may be something that's already going to be coming up, in which case I will let you know when you can expect that later in the broadcast. So I really hope that you all enjoy yourselves. And again, please comment anytime. We want to know what you like and how we can help you. But without further ado, let's get into the interview with Josh, because I'm really excited to bring you this. So let's roll this. Hi, good morning, Josh.
Good morning.
I'm so glad that we have with us today Josh Grisdale from Accessible Japan. And as you know, this is a segment of the longer show that we're doing today, but I can't talk about access in Japan and going to Japan as a tourist with some kind of mobility impairment without talking about Accessible Japan. Let's just talk about who you are and what it is that we're talking about. So Accessible Japan. So tell us who you are and how you came to be in Japan.
Sure.
And then the follow-on, why you decided to create this site.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. If it gets a bit long, you can cut me off and say hurry up with it. I am originally from Canada. I always say I'm from Toronto, which is partially true because I was born in Toronto. But when I was about 4 years old, we moved out into the country, and it's sort of really, really in the middle of nowhere. But I always just say I'm from Toronto. So I lived there, until I graduated high school. But along the way in high school, we had a Japanese class at my high school, and it's a little bit unusual for something placed in the middle of nowhere to have a Japanese class available. But it was the teacher who taught shop. He needed to have a second teachable. It was a requirement of the school board, so he had lived in Japan for a number of years and he decided to teach Japanese. And for myself at that time, I was really into IT, and I wanted to go into that sector. And I thought it's a very competitive sector, so having something like Japanese as well would be a very good thing to have on my resume. So that was the reason I started taking Japanese. And to my surprise, the Japanese teacher was very, very lenient. It wasn't like the French class I had taken and hated before that, where it's all sorts of drills and homework and tests and stuff like that. He is very much laid back, and he also spent a lot of time teaching us about culture in Japan. So every Friday was sort of a culture Friday. So we'd eat cookies from the cafeteria, which is not Japanese, of course, but we'd watch some bootlegged dramas or movies from Japan that he had brought over or bought at some suspicious shopping center. And so we watched those. And that sort of gave me a glimpse into Japan, both historical dramas we watched, but also, the more modern, love comedy dramas and stuff like that. So it really piqued my interest in Japan. And because there wasn't, this strenuous focus on tests and drills, I enjoyed the class. And so I got more and more interested in Japan, and I thought, I want to come visit. So I came for the first time in 2000. And that was after I graduated high school before going to university. And I came over with my dad, and there's tons and tons of questions about what accessibility is going to be like here in Japan. Of course, back in 2000, there may have been TripAdvisor, I'm not quite sure, but there wasn't like it is now, where you have everything at your fingertips on the internet. So you're looking at guidebooks, and if there is anything on accessibility, it might be a paragraph saying something like, Japan is not very friendly for wheelchair users or something like that. and that's about all you get. And so, but my parents, knew I was interested in Japan, and they'd always encourage me to, just try things, even if it doesn't work out in the long run, just to give it a try and see, because it's worth the experience. So I came with my dad, and I was blown away and pleasantly surprised, partly because I probably didn't have an image of accessibility in my mind, and so I was able to do a lot more things than I thought I could do. Probably back in 2000, and it was maybe about 20 to 30% of the stations in Tokyo were accessible. I didn't leave Tokyo on that trip, but there's enough of the major places I could go and get around on the train. There's a lot of things you had to sort of do that were unusual. For example, like you'd have to, if you want to go through Tokyo Station, you'd have to go down through the third basement for where they're taking all the bentos through and stuff like that, and go through the secret passages. And when I went to Akihabara, they had to use the elevator that was used for internal use, and so I got dropped off by the garbage disposal area outside in the alley. But I was able to do these things, and that was really encouraging to me. And so I went to university back in Canada, and I came back again to Japan about 2 years after that, and I had this wild vision of going across the country. So I came with one of my care attendants, and we went from Tokyo to Nagoya to Nara, Kyoto, Osaka, Hiroshima, Fukuoka, and Nagasaki in about 2 weeks, all on the Shinkansen, and it's just a really exciting time. And I think that the biggest thing that was encouraging to me was that the pace of the change in accessibility. The first times I'd come, every time I came, there were new places that opened up to me, that places that hadn't been accessible before had put in elevators, or places that just were not accessible at all became more and more accessible to me. And every time I came, it improved and improved. Back in Toronto, very, very small subway system, and they had always been promising it's going to be accessible, but it's always going to be by 2015 it'll be accessible, then it's by 2020, and then 2025, and I think it's 2035 now. But whereas now in Tokyo, I think about 97 or at least over 96% of the train stations are now accessible, and that's a huge. I mean, there's tons of stations, so the advances in that are crazy. So that was one of the things that drew me to Japan, and I thought, oh, this is a place I could live. And so I came here in 2007 to live. I'd come a couple more times for vacation after that, before that. And then 2007, I started living here. In 2016, I became a Japanese citizen. So I'm no longer Canadian. I had to give up my Canadian citizenship for that. But now I'm a Japanese citizen. And I work for a company in Japan that provides welfare services for the elderly, as well as kindergartens and nursery schools. And we're also going to be branching out into disability care in the coming years. So that's my day job. And my after hours job is I run a website called Accessible Japan. And it's sort of a portal site, sort of all your basics you need to know to hopefully have a successful trip to Japan. And so you can not worry about the little things, but you can get back to the joy of travel. I think that if you're traveling with a disability, a lot of people get caught up in the details and worries about this and that, and everything. They see something, oh, I want to go there, but then the second question is immediately, can I go there? If I go there, am I going to be disappointed? And so it sort of adds a lot of stress to travel. So hopefully by providing enough information through the website, people will get back to the joy of travel.
As we're going throughout the program today, I will be giving people a whole bunch of tips about things that I've learned. And a lot of it, I think, is knowing what your needs really are. And that, I think, is something people maybe don't have to think about in certain other countries. But if you know specifically what it is that you need and what you don't need, then you're not having to find, something that's got 100% of the bells and whistles if you only need 50% of the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
So I still think hotel accommodation is one where it's tricky, particularly tricky. I'm fortunate that I don't need a hoist and I don't need some of the other equipment, but You know, I don't need like the changing rooms, but even changing rooms, I found Japan has some of the best, you know, accessible bathrooms with like places to change, to rinse out colostomy bags and things like that,
Yeah.
and full flat changing areas for adults who need it.
Mhm.
So in some ways, Japan is really ahead of the curve. And
Oh yeah.
now combine that with the language getting better, I am hoping today that we can really convince people that if you want to go abroad, Japan is a
Mhm.
really good choice,
Mhm.
especially English speaker. So that was I
Yeah,
was
it's because of the language barrier. I mean, things are definitely getting much better, but I think there's also a lot of specific words and phrases that come along with being disabled. So I did actually come up with a small little dictionary on the website for some of the essential words you'll need for for traveling with a disability. So that's obviously free for everybody to use as well. But because I think a lot of people in Japan, they've had their middle school and maybe some high school English, and they can say things like here's the stairs and here's the elevator. But if you have to say something, I'm epileptic, they're not going to know the word for epileptic, and you're definitely most likely not going to know it for English. So I think having that communication barrier go away also does definitely help people feel more confident in their travel.
Yeah, and we will be talking about food allergies later in the program because that's something that I have had a lot of difficulty with. There are ways that you can pre-print a lot of
Yeah.
information. So
Hmm.
that is, a top tip for everybody, no matter what your situation is. If you find yourself explaining something on a regular basis,
Hmm.
have somebody translate it, print it on a card, and take it with you.
Oh
So,
yeah, sure,
uh,
definitely. The laws now require that any station with over 3,000 daily users, which sounds like a lot, but in Japan that's nothing. That it has to have an accessible route to use the system. So that's why you have so many stations in Tokyo and Osaka that are accessible. Now, if you go out to the country, that definitely drops down quite a bit. But they're actually even trying to move it to 2,000 daily users now. So they're definitely making huge improvements.
but a lot of times you do have to change elevators multiple times.
Yeah.
So I would say another big point of advice is to allow a lot of extra time to
Oh, for
find
sure.
elevators.
Yeah.
And then, it may take 3 or 4 elevators to get to where you're going.
Yeah,
So
whenever I use Google Maps, I usually add maybe an extra 20 minutes for if there's a transfer, and then maybe an extra 10 minutes on each end for where you're getting on and getting off, because you never know how long it's going to be. And also, sometimes you need to wait for staff to escort you for some of those parts of it. A lot of the stations are accessible now, but the problem was that the accessibility was added on afterwards. So sometimes, they didn't put the elevator in the ideal position. They put the elevator where they could put the elevator, and that sometimes means going back and forth a lot, or even sometimes going out of the station, walking a block, and then going back into the station. That happens, I think, a lot in yes, in Nihonbashi Station. You have to cross the street and then go back down to another elevator if you want to go on the other side of the train. So
I know that I had been to Takada Baba 3 times before I found the elevators
oh
because they were way down the end of the platform.
right.
And they also haven't synced up like where the elevator is to where the accessible car is.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So I mean but that isn't as big of a problem. I mean,
Right. Well, and also if you go to any of if you know which train station your train line your station is on, if you go to the website and you look up the train station, I think pretty much all of them, anyways, will have sort of a 3D map of what the station is like, and they have usually a red line indicating the accessibility route. So it's a little bit, extra work you need to do, but that can sort of maybe at least, give you a leg up on an idea of where the elevator should be, or that there is one or not. So. That's why I myself do it frequently. So
so let's get back to the website because
yeah,
you have a lot of resources available. So can you tell us, what a person can expect when they go there? Because I'd like to
sure.
highlight a couple of those features in particular.
Yeah. So well, I started the website partly because like when I first came to Japan, there really wasn't any information in English about accessibility, and then a number of years back, I went on vacation and I was realizing that still there wasn't really much information in English on accessibility. And so, because I speak Japanese as well, I would look up things in Japanese and I'd find a lot of times what I was looking for. Still not enough in Japanese, I think, but I realized, oh, there's so many people that probably want to come to Japan that, don't know where to start. Or even before that, there's this idea I think a lot of people have that Japan is not accessible. Japan is not an accessible travel destination. I think, as humans, we like to lump things together, and for for here in Japan, when we think of Europe, we put it all together as Europe, where even Sweden and Greece and Germany are all very, very different infrastructures and cultures and such, that it's not very easy to sort of lump things together. So I think a lot of people put Asia all together, and so they'll put Thailand and Philippines and China and Japan all into one Asia, and it's their image is crowded trains and busy bikes going down all the streets all over the place and stuff like that. And so they have this impression that, oh, Japan is not a place I can go to. So part of the reason for the website was to, first of all, encourage people that, yes, you can come and enjoy Japan if you have a disability, and then go to the next step of, here are some things that will help you all along your way. So I have a lot of sort of just general information. So like you mentioned before, the bathrooms in Japan, and I think they're really fantastic here. So I have a section on that, because for myself, I know I'm a worrier about toilets, and when I go somewhere new, I want to know that I'm going to be able to use the toilet. So having the knowledge about that, it's really assuring to people, I think. How to use the train, how to use the subways, etc., or the buses. A lot of the basics for getting around Japan, but from an accessibility angle. On top of that, I have reviews of a number of tourist attractions, the biggest ones. I think I'm about maybe 100 places now, roughly. And they're all places I've been to, or the person who has been to them has a disability, and they've shared information with me. And so I live in Tokyo, so they're very Tokyo-centric, but there are a number from Kyoto and Osaka and Tottori as well, because just places I've been to, so I usually try to write things up and take pictures and stuff like that. After that, I have sort of a small database of hotels. A lot of that information is mostly just from the internet, from information I collect either from the hotel's website or from contacting the hotel and asking questions. Because I think one of the bigger challenges definitely is finding an accessible accommodation here in Japan. Compared to a lot of other countries, the rules around accessible hotels are quite lax. In general, the law has been that if you have less than 50 rooms in your hotel, you're not required to have an accessible room. If you have over 50 rooms, then you were required to have one accessible room, which was the law up until maybe 2 years ago. So that meant that the hotels don't want to have any extra hotel rooms that they don't want. So they generally just meet the very basic requirements. Even if you have a hotel with 300 rooms in it, they still only have one accessible room, and it's usually not a very nice one. It's usually the most standard room, and it's on the low floors.
Single. It's usually a single. So if you're traveling with a partner or a caretaker, they have to have another room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's definitely one challenge, that there's a severe lack of accessible rooms. I think the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transportation, they did a survey a while back, and they found that of all the rooms, not hotels, of all the rooms available in Japan, only about 0.4% are accessible. And then even that, the definition of accessible has been very lenient as well, that you should be able to, there should be no steps, and you should be able to turn around in a wheelchair. I think we're basically the only rules for that. I think actually sort of a tip for some people is that I think a lot of people who maybe have some slight disability or light needs, they think, oh, I'm fine usually with a regular room. Whereas in Japan, and that may be the case in some hotels, but a lot of the business hotels, the cheaper ones for used by people when they're on business trips, they'll actually have a step going into the bathroom. And that's sort of, I think, quite uncommon and unknown in other parts of the world. So they think, oh, I'm fine with just a regular room, but then they get there and there's a step. I've experienced that when I was back here when I was in university. I was like, how am I going to get in there? And so you have to be very careful when selecting rooms. Unfortunately, they have changed it now, so they're trying to do 1% of the rooms must be accessible. So if you have that situation where you have 300 rooms, then you'd have to have at least 3 rooms that are accessible. So they are making improvements. I think the Olympics and Paralympics has had a big impact on that. But yeah, again, the standards, you go to one accessible room and you try to figure out what's accessible other than they have a handle by the toilet. Whereas other rooms you go in, it's sort of like a medical institution with all these contraptions everywhere. So that you have to do a lot of legwork for finding a hotel room. And unfortunately, a lot of the information is not on the hotel websites. Sometimes they'll have an accessible hotel room, but they won't list it on the website for whatever reason. Or they have an accessible room, which they'll mention and have one small picture and no information on it. So you end up having to contact them anyways. And then also to do to reserve the room, generally you can't do it through the online reservation system. You need to contact the hotel directly. So that provides a whole bunch of extra barriers for people to when they're traveling. So on the website I have a list of hotels that have accessible rooms, and I tried to provide as much information on them. The booking isn't done through the website. It's sort of like, here's information. You might want to try these hotels. After that, I have a few tours. Sorry, I should mention it. This is a side project of mine. It's not a business, so it's mostly information sharing. So the tours are provided by people who run tour companies. I just sort of say that these ones are focused on accessibility or have some sort of accessibility component to them. So there's some places that offer complete packages. Other places have some day trips and stuff like that. So I sort of introduced those. I've had some input in them as well, training some of the tour guides about what it's like to go around Tokyo with a disability. So I think you can use them with confidence. And yeah, I've also a community forum there so people can ask questions. And I think that's very important because before I was sort of fielding all the answers and, even right now talking with you, there's things I just learned myself. I had never heard about the not being able to use the stair lift during the rush hour. So, that would, if somebody had asked me that, I would say, oh, no, it's fine. But I just learned that it's not. So I think that's what's important to have community and to share different experiences and opinions, because you can learn so much more with a lot of people being involved. So I think that's the website in a nutshell. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. Actually, one of the things I've lately been doing for myself anyways is actually using YouTube a lot. A lot of people will write the review of staying in a hotel, or sorry, not write, I feel old now, will vlog their review of staying in a room, and so they'll put that up, and having that video, them walking around the room gives you an idea of the layout much better than the hotel would be. Or maybe for the outside of the hotel, I'd use Google Street View, and just hotels.com or some other websites where people can put their own pictures up, and you'll sometimes find the things you need that way as well. So I think the internet has been such a huge help for people with disabilities and travel for so many different reasons for that.
Absolutely. Our booking apartments, we often bring our own air mattress because if I have one that I know works for me, because they now have really tall air mattresses.
Okay.
Sometimes that's far more comfortable than whatever futon option they may be giving you. So these are all like just little hacks that may make otherwise non-accessible rooms more accessible for an individual. We've mostly been talking about mobility disabilities and, walking or not walking needs, but Japan is really ahead of the world for visual impairments. There's so many additional things that are the tactile pavements on stairs and on the pavements itself, into the stations, out of the stations, into buildings. I have never seen so many different options for vision impairment as in Japan. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Actually, well, the tactile blocks were a Japanese invention back in the 1960s. A guy, was wanted to help the students at a school for the blind to be able to move around more independently. So he came up with these tactile blocks. So if anybody's, I don't know how many people, how common they are in other parts of the world, but they're often yellow, but they're at least, visually stand out from the rest of the sidewalk. They have mostly two patterns. One pattern is sort of long bars going along, they follow the direction of the path you're on. And that sort of just means go ahead and you keep going this direction. And then when there's sort of something that you should be aware of, for example, if you're going to be crossing the street or if there's a flight of steps, then they will be a series of dots. And so that sort of indicates the change in direction. Actually, I was listening to a podcast recently, and there was a guy called Tony the Traveler. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's been to, I think, about 140 different countries. He's fully blind and he's partially deaf. And he just loves travel. And he said that Japan was one of the easiest places for him to get around. And he mentioned also the Braille. Unfortunately, the Braille is Japanese Braille, so it's not. I mean, I guess that makes sense. There are 2 extra dots on the Braille, each Braille character that they don't have in Romanized character Braille. So you have to keep that in mind as well. But there's a lot of, I think, attention to detail in Japan here, and so you'll find things that a lot of people don't know unless they need to know. Is that, for example, under the railing when you're going downstairs at a train station, they'll have Braille written on the underside of that, and it'll say this is platform 2 heading to Shinjuku. And so it's sort of a nice subtle hint, but helpful for those people who need it. As well as a lot of the ticket stations, the ticket selling machines will have Braille available. When they changed to touch screens, though, there was a bit of an issue, but they will have an option to read it out for you as well. I don't believe there's English for those at the moment, but there's definitely some really great advantages here. For somebody who's using a guide dog, they will need to prepare in advance for that. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that you need to be on the ball when you're planning. Not only is there the quarantine for the dog, but also to have a harness here in Japan, it has to be technically it had to be a dog who is trained in Japan, and that makes sense in the ways that the rules are different, the rules of the road, etc., are different. But to make it easier for visitors from abroad, one of the guide dog associations here offers temporary licensing. But again, that does take some advanced paperwork, etc. To do that. So there's tons of possibilities for a variety of travel opportunities. Also, most buses and trains and train stations, they will have a writing board available for those who are hard of hearing, so they can write for a communication board, it's called. So you can write things in it. And actually, a lot of people in Japan, as you mentioned, the English is getting better. People tend to be better at written English than spoken English anyways, so that's definitely helpful for people who are hard of hearing or deaf.
I found that a lot of people who claim they speak no English at all, they may not speak English, but they can understand English perfectly.
Yeah. For people with neurodiversity challenges, there's also, I think Narita Airport now has calm down rooms available upon request. And actually, we have had a blog post in the past from somebody who has autism and his trip to Japan. He's a YouTuber as well. And so I'm sure if you have a question about that, we could ask him to reply. And again, it's sort of going back to the knowing yourself and your needs. And, one of the things for him was just that he had his headphones with him and, music he liked at all times. And so if he felt stressed, he could just put on his headphones and that would help him to calm back down again and get ready to move on with the next step of his trip. So I think just knowing your needs, knowing what the situation is, makes it a world of difference. So and I think the biggest thing is with the Olympics and Paralympics, which are being held in a unique way this year. There's been a lot of focus on becoming better, and a lot of the desire for this Olympics was the 1964 Olympics was sort of to show that Japan has become a modern country and that it made a huge leaps in infrastructure in the country. And one of the goals for this Olympics was to promote Japan as an inclusive and diverse country. And they want the legacy to be a legacy of being accepting of all people. And I've heard a number of people mention that, including some of the people who are in charge of the Ministry of Infrastructure, Land, and Transportation, Tourism. So that's definitely really encouraging. I'm involved in a couple different government boards on the tourism board, as well as just for the general accessibility. And there's definitely a huge move to make things accessible for people. If you're actually if you want to use by taxis, actually, there's some good news recently that the Japan taxis, which are sort of modeled after the London taxis. Now, they're not ideal for somebody in a large power wheelchair. For example, if I want to use it, I have to remove my headrest to get into the taxi, but it is possible. But there's one of the taxi ride apps called S-Ride that you can put on your phone, and you can call, it's sort of like an Uber kind of thing, where you can call a taxi, but you can specify that you want the accessible taxi or the Japan taxi. So that can help for getting around as well. So
there is also one company in Tokyo that is only accessible vans, I believe. Is that MK, I believe? I don't remember. They only have 5 units.
Okay.
Their entire service is just accessible, and they're the full van size.
Yeah, there are full van size. There are actually a large number of them. Unfortunately, they're often run by an individual, so they won't have a website, and they tend to go through the local city. So if they're usually maybe taking people to the hospital appointments, stuff like that. But they are available, and if you are interested in finding one, it can definitely help you up if you ask in the forum. But yeah, it's definitely getting easier to get around at all levels in Japan, and so it's encouraging. They're also, the government's encouraging hotels to be more open about, or more promote their accessibility more openly and frequently. Actually, I think food is definitely a big issue as well in Japan. A lot of people, want to have delicious Japanese food, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people come. Unfortunately, a lot of the restaurants tend to be less accessible than other parts of the general infrastructure. That's just because, especially in places like Tokyo, everything is crowded and squished into small buildings, and a lot of times they'll have steps. And even if the restaurant has a desire to become accessible, they generally are tenants in the building, so they can't make any large scale modifications to their facility. But there are a couple of apps that you can use that were created by a Japanese company. One is B Maps. It just as it sounds B Maps, and it's made by a company called Miraido, and their president is in a wheelchair, and it's sort of a crowdsourced accessibility mapping project. And so you can look up places. You can also submit your own places, and it sort of works on, like, the reviews will be written in Japanese perhaps, but there are symbols, like, so you can say there's no steps, or it's a noisy environment, or it's not well lit, or something like that. So you can do those, and you can filter and search for that. Another one is called Wheel Log, and so it's wheel and log, but there's only one L between the two words. And it's also created by a lady with a disability, and it's quite similar in the features. The main difference for that one is that it also tracks your GPS movements. If you want to, of course, you have to give permission to. But that allows people to know which routes are accessible. So when you're walking around or going around a certain area, sometimes Google Maps will point you to cross the street here, and it will be a pathway above walking across the street, like a bridge across the street, and there are only steps. Yeah. So if you use this map, it'll show you where other users have gone, so you can get an idea of which are the accessible routes. So there are ways to find accessible restaurants, as well as there's one Guru Navi, which is sort of a Yelp for restaurants in Japan. They have filters for accessibility as well. So, and they're worked on improving as well. So, I mean, it's a good start. I mean, you should always do your research and always be expecting that, it may not be as you envision, but it sort of gives you a good place to start, I think. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I have used Beam Maps and I have used Guru Navi a lot. I did not know about Wheellog, but that is, I'm really excited to try that next time, because I have had that same situation where even if you're looking just on the map itself and you think, well, this street intersects with this street, and you don't realize that actually one is, 2 levels above, or it's a very, very steep ramp to get down from one point to the other. I wish there was a not a Google Maps street view, but like a Google Maps topographical.
Yeah. Well, as I say, so I think both of them are available in English if your phone is in English, so that should be fine. BMaps, one of the other great things about it is that they have a web version, so you can use it for planning in advance. So you can use your computer and you can look up places and click and there'll be information. A lot of people are putting pictures up as well, so that will definitely be helpful. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of unknown but exciting projects going on here in Japan. So
I found that TripAdvisor for finding accommodations, when you're looking at individual reviews, can be very helpful too, because they do have the symbols on there.
Right.
Obviously, it's up to the hotel many times to say whether they're accessible, but then usually if they've said they're accessible and they're not, someone has probably put up a review saying it was a bit sketchy.
Yeah.
So I don't always like review sites, but I found that one in particular, because it does have tie-ins with the Japanese tourist office, to have the most information about all of the non-Japanese sites, but they have a lot of tie-ins and a lot of useful information. And you can actually search based on criteria of accessibility when you're searching for hotels or other accommodations, tourism-based things. Veltra also has a lot of accessible options, including accessible tours. Beyond my budget, but
Yeah. Was it the tourism board? They also just like last week, I think it was, released a restaurant guide. Now it was built and focused around Olympic venues. So it's sort of all the areas of the Olympic venues. Here are some restaurants you can use, and they're actually it's a PDF that you download. It's not very interactive, but there's a number of pictures. There are a number of symbols that represent things and indicating this is for power wheelchair user, this is a non-power wheelchair user, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of information available. So I think the most encouraging thing from that is that the Japanese government is definitely considering it now more than in the past. I think now that we have an aging population and Japan really wants to use tourism to boost its economy, that there is a focus on that. We need to not just get lots of numbers, but we need to make sure that everybody has a great time while they're here. And to provide information for everyone. It's the aging population is definitely a huge help, because I've been a number of times where I've gone to this. I went to Miyazaki and I went to a shrine there. It's probably not going to be accessible, but then there's a ramp placed on, it looked like a temporary one, but it was placed on the steps to get in. I was like, oh wow, great, and walked in a bit further and I saw there was a wedding going on. And the grandfather and grandmother of one of the sides of the wedding, both of them were in wheelchairs. And so, I think it's definitely changing the perspectives here in Japan now, is that, even as you get older and if you can't walk as well, it doesn't mean that you still have to stay at home. You still want to enjoy a lot of things. And so a lot of actually onsen as well are becoming more accessible. Which is good, because of just the situation. A lot of them, it's very, very difficult to be accessible, but there are a few, and particularly because of the aging population, are thinking more about it. I know one lady who's a university professor. She's written, I think, about 3 books about accessible onsen, and she sort of advertises it not as for wheelchair users or for people with disabilities, but as the giving back to your family, going as a family trip, taking your parents to thank them for everything. So I think it's definitely seeing lots of good change in Japanese cultural places that a lot of foreign tourists also want to visit.
Let's talk a little bit about some of your other projects. You have a book, so tell us about your book.
I do. I was encouraged to write a book by my mother because she says that well, it's great to look at a website. There are a lot of people that want to take something with them, something to mark up, to have sort of insurance, if even if you don't have internet when you're traveling, etc. So basically, the book, I won't lie, it's basically the information from the website in a book format. It's available both on Kindle and in print format through Amazon. So that was sort of a project. I've updated it for 2020. So it's fairly recent because I haven't been going out very much because of Corona, of course. And it's focused. Sorry, it's a guide to Tokyo. Maybe in the future I'll hopefully add other guides, but it is just for Tokyo. So it includes all the basics again. It has the dictionary in the back. It has a rundown of different accommodations. It doesn't include the hotels, but because I assume that once you're in Japan, you're already probably picked out your hotels. Yeah, if people are interested in that, they're definitely welcome to pick that up.
And you also have another website.
Yeah, I'm addicted to punishment, and so because of my experience with Accessible Japan and having the forum and community, and also traveling to other places and wanting the same type of thing, I created a different website called Tabbyfolk, and there's sort of definitely a link to Japan in there because Tabby is the word for journey or trip in Japan, and folk is the the English the people, so it's people on a journey or on a voyage. And so it's tabbyfolk.com, TABIFOLK.com. And basically it's sort of a mix between Facebook and Reddit for accessible travel. So it's a place where people can come together. They can create connections with other travelers. They can go to different theme-based groups and ask questions there. For example, we have a group on Japan, of course, but also for the States or for England. And so they can ask a question like, hey, I'm looking for a hotel in Paris. Does anybody have any suggestions? And then other people can answer. So that's another project that's, again, of COVID-19, but it's starting to pick up. And I'm also trying to get different tourist companies, tourism companies and tour companies available as well, so that they can answer people's questions, as well as influencers and experts in their area as well. So and also just a place to have some fun. You can share pictures of your favorite accessible restaurant, or if you want to rant, if you want to say I had this horrible experience and I just want a shoulder to cry on, and it's accessible travel related, then that they can do that as well. So yeah, it's tabbyfolk.com. That's one.
Okinawa was my introduction to Japan because my father was stationed there before I was born.
Right.
So we've always had that connection in my family. So it's I wish I could afford to go there more. As a tourist resort, it is slightly expensive, but that's
go to Ishigaki-jima is probably one of my favorites because there are about 5 or 6 different other islands that are all connected by ferries, which are more or less accessible. Some of them are quite accessible. Other ones is sort of a little bit of a gap they help you over. But and in some of the smaller islands, they also do have accessible vans available. And it's sort of a very unique part of Japan, and it's Japan, but it's also got its own traditional heritage as well from before it became part of Japan. And so you get to do a lot of exciting things there. And they also have these water buffaloes that can take you around on a tour of one of the old cities, and they actually have one that's accessible. It's got a ramp at the back, so I was quite surprised. So I've had a water buffalo ride.
Yeah, I've seen the tours. I didn't know that there was an except. That's great. That's on my list of things to do soon. So yeah, that's I cannot wait until we can start traveling again. Certainly, at this point in time, we have no idea how long it's going to be before Japan is going to open up to tourism. Quite a few months at the minimum, but everyone is getting in that direction, is going there. So thank you so much, Josh.
My pleasure.
You can always contact me or Josh or any of the people on the Accessible Japan community if you have questions. And like I said, somebody somewhere will do their best to help you. It's a wonderful community, and I really cannot say enough really great things about it. So thanks again. And for the rest of everyone, stay tuned, and we will be getting into a lot of detail. Don't worry, you don't have to take notes. I will have everything up on the website afterwards. Big thanks. Big thanks to Josh for that. Like I said, Josh was not able to be here live because it is currently not quite 5 in the morning in Japan, but he is prepared for your questions whenever you have them. You'll see at the bottom of the screen. Accessible Japan is the link on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. You can contact him or just go on the site. I strongly recommend that you go on the website, create an account. You can pop in the forums, ask whatever questions you have, because one thing that is going to be a theme that we'll continue talking about the rest of the day is that everyone's needs are different, and I can't answer 100% of your questions, and he can't answer 100% of your questions. So that's why we have a community. We all have different, different areas of Japan that we're going to, or different needs that we have, and it's tricky. But I have found that every single time I've had a question, someone has been able to either give me an answer quickly or at least point me in the right direction. So again, big thanks to Josh for that interview. And I'd like to apologize to the audience. We've been having some technical issues. I know that Twitch is having issues, StreamYard, the platform that we use, is having issues, and my internet went down 3 times in the middle of that. So a little bit of a jinx day, but I certainly appreciate those of you who have been with us. I'm also watching the numbers kind of blip in and out quite rapidly, so I feel like some of you aren't able to connect to Twitch. And remember, if you've missed anything, if it's cut out on you, this will be available on YouTube and the Accommodations website later. It'll be up on YouTube this afternoon and the Accommodations website probably tonight or tomorrow. And we will actually repair the video glitches that happened earlier so that when you watch the replay on our website, you'll have the complete version, not the slightly weird video version that froze up and sped up and things like that. So thank you for those of you who are still with us. And this is a time when I'm going to be live. I'm going to be going through presentations, taking questions, hopefully answering questions. So again, if you don't have a Twitch account, I strongly encourage you to sign up for one so that you can pop comments into the chat. And then, like I said, everyone who gives us a comment today, I will do my best to point you to that information. This is mostly my experience from this point out. You may or may not know that I'm a part-time wheelchair user, full-time mobility aid user, so I always have like a rollator or a cane or something. I have difficulty with stairs. I have difficulty with food allergies. I have chronic pain, chronic illness. So all of my trips to Japan have been through the lens of someone who has mobility impairments and other health needs. So I am happy to open the vault of my brain's knowledge and share with you as much information as I can possibly give you before you get bored. So we're going to pull slides up. I will say that my slides are not a lot of information, so we may kind of be switching between just looking at me and looking at the slides. But these are more just bullet points that I'm going to riff on. So I didn't want to throw too many links at you. Part of that is because we don't know what's still going to be, what companies will still be in business by 2021, which is when we expect they're going to be opening Japan for tourism. It's going to be at least 6 months from now. So let me move into the slide. I've got to pull up the correct window here. Let me move into the slides. Also, just so you know, this is the very end of sakura season, so you'll notice I still have my sakura backdrop up, and I've got sakura themed slides for you because that is my favorite flower. And if you didn't notice our introduction at the beginning, we do have our floral frill for all coming up on May 8th. So wear your favorite floral gear and talk to our J Fashion group on the 8th of May in Zoom. But we can talk about that again later. Let's get into traveling with disabilities. This is just the overview of what I'm going to be talking about, so you have an idea of when I'm going to get to each topic in this order. I would like to say, feel free to ask questions at any point. If it is something that I am going to be getting back to in a minute, I may just say, wait a minute, I'm getting there. But otherwise, these are the things that we're going to be talking about in the broad overview. The most important thing that you need to know is how to know your own needs, and I'll talk about that. We'll talk about getting to Japan and flights and airports and things like that. We'll talk about traveling within Japan, getting between cities or even inside the major cities. Talk about finding accommodation, because that is probably the most difficult aspect of this. Then we'll go into medical needs. So it may be things that you need to bring with you or that you might want to rent while you're over there, and what is available to rent or what are the limitations on them. We'll talk a little bit about sightseeing because honestly, by the time we've gotten through all the others, you've got a lot of resources that'll already be in your toolkit to look up accessible sites. Certainly Accessible Japan is the #1 reference I would give you. And then at the end, we'll talk about finding restaurants and how to deal with food allergies. And I'll mention again those sites that Josh had talked about, the B maps, the wheel log, and everything else. They'll be mentioned again at that point. So again, not a slide heavy presentation. It's going to be much more just kind of me talking to you, sharing my experience. So really encourage you to ask questions, make comments, anything else. The #1 thing that you need to know, and this is whether you are traveling to Japan or anywhere in the world, you could be traveling from Austin to San Antonio, you know, whatever, wherever you're going, when you're traveling and you have some kind of disability or impairment, the most important thing is to know what you need. We mentioned this very briefly in the interview, but I'm going to get into it in more detail. What I mean by know your needs. So you need to know your body very well. You need to know what its limitations are. How long can you walk before you need to sit down? An important thing in Japan, there's not a lot of seating. There's not like park benches or places you can sit. Other places in the United States, like you go to a mall, there's a chair or someplace to sit down. Not the same situation in Japan. So you need to know exactly how long you can walk before you need to take a break. You need to know what your sleep schedules are like. You know, are you a morning person? Are you a nighttime person? How many hours do you need? How much quiet do you need? Obviously, you need to know sort of when your eating times are and how often you need to eat and things about your own diet. Things will change as you are traveling. I mean, obviously, when you're in a foreign country, there's going to be different foods. There's going to be different, time zone issues and things like that. But the more you know about your daily routine and your essential needs, the more you can plan your trip to make sure you're getting those needs met. And remember that you will have a certain amount of adrenaline because you're on vacation. But if you're a person who maybe you get 3 or 4 hours a day, good hours a day, as we call it, don't plan 14 hours a day while you're on vacation. You'll probably get an extra boost because of the adrenaline of being on vacation, but not 3 times your normal capacity. So it's very important to know your stamina and your abilities and not overdo it, because that can lead to later on in the trip, you wind up, not being able to fill your schedule. Know what you need as far as accommodation. Maybe you don't need a fully accessible room. You just need to not have too many stairs or no stairs at all. Would you be okay with the bathroom having about a 4-inch step? That's very common in Japan. A lot of times they build in drainage underneath the floor of the bathroom. And as a result, the bathroom floor is raised a little for the extra drainage areas. And so if you are okay with having a step about 10 centimeters, about 4 inches between the floor and the bathroom, that will open up more possibilities for you. But if you need it to be completely roll in, it's important to know. Same thing with do you need a bed, or are you okay on a futon or sleep accommodation that's on the floor? Because obviously traditional sleeping in Japan will be on the floor. And if your knees are difficult like mine, maybe that's something you can't do. I will say as a side note, there is no way to know in advance how hard the beds are going to be. They are extra, extra firm by North American standards. And, maybe you need to make some plans for bringing a mattress topper or something like that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But, know how hard or soft a bed you need as well, and whether you can make do with something for a short term, and how many days you can make do. So all of these things are just really knowing what your daily experience is like so that you can translate that to try to keep your normality as much as we can possibly sustain for you. Know how much assistance you need. I used to always travel with a caregiver, and it was the end of 2019 was the first time I took an international trip completely solo, because I'd been to Japan enough times that I was comfortable with it. But do you need someone to go with you, or do you not? And how much does that person need to know? Do they need to know your schedule, or is it okay to just have a friend to call in case something happens? Know what your food allergy situations are like. That's super important. And then also, are you a breakfast person? Do you have certain foods that you find are a requirement as part of your day? Some medications have to be taken with milk. any of those issues that may be involved, you need to be aware of that. What type of toileting facilities do you need? Obviously, Japan has better facilities, public facilities, than any other country I've been in. You can walk into an accessible bathroom and they have, deep sinks for colostomy bags. They have lay flat accommodation for people who need changing rooms or adult changing facilities. It's really great, but then you have to be able to find those fully fledged toilet facilities and know where they are, and usually train stations and things like that. But, are you okay with the regular bathroom? Fortunately, for the most part, in most tourist areas, they don't have squat toilets. But if you're trying to find a lavatory in a temple or shrine, it may only be a squat toilet. And I can't do that. My knees don't do that. So these are things that you just need to be aware of. Do you have sensory concerns? Are crowds a problem? Loud noises? Do you need extra time to rest? For me, if I've had a flights are very painful. I need 24 hours ideally after a long haul flight to just do nothing. So I build that time into my schedule. How many days a week can you go out and really be sightseeing? You don't want to plan 7 days back-to-back sightseeing if your body can only handle 3. And then have to let down the rest of the people that you're traveling with, as all of a sudden you come to a screeching halt because you've overbooked yourself. And then the issues with long haul flights and jet lag. So this is obviously not something you're going to know if this is your first long haul flight, but if you're already aware that you have jet lag problems, then you need to factor that into your schedule. Again, the whole point of that is it's really important to know your own body, or if you're traveling with maybe senior adults, maybe your parents, your grandparents, something like that, know what their limitations are and know what they actually are, not necessarily what they think. Because I have certainly had the experience of traveling with some senior citizens who think they're more capable than they are. And the more that you can find out about their limitations, the better experience you will have. Let's talk a little bit about getting to Japan. I'm talking about the flights, unless you are particularly interested in traveling by ship, in which case I have no information for you whatsoever. I'm going to talk about airlines, and I'm talking specifically about airlines from North America at this point. However, I have gone to Japan from Australia and from Europe. If you want information about airlines from those places, drop me a line and I will send you my experiences. But flying from North America, I strongly recommend flying ANA, which is All Nippon Airways, or JAL, which is Japan Airlines, if you can fly from California. The JAL flight out of Dallas is not operated by JAL. It's a code share with American Airlines. And if you know anything about airline companies in North America, you know that American Airlines is maybe one of the least disability-friendly airlines currently flying in the United States. So I really hate that particular flight from Dallas to Tokyo, supposedly Japan Airlines, but really American Airlines. I will always take extra time, extra money to take an ANA trip because you just get so much more legroom. But maybe you don't have an option. Maybe you've got connections with an airline and you can get, cheaper flights some way, or you don't live in an area where you have all of these options available to you. It's important to contact your airline in advance and see what kind of assistance they can offer you. Not only assistance within the airport, but if you are bringing on a mobility aid, such as a wheelchair, know what the policies are. Nowadays, most people don't have wet cell batteries, they're all dry cell batteries, but find out certainly if you have lithium batteries, if it's the kind that can go in the cargo hold or not. This is airline by airline, you're gonna have different regulations. You need to contact them well and truly in advance so that you have enough information to know whether you can take your wheelchair on board with you, whether it has to go in cargo, when you're gonna get it back, if it does have to go in cargo, can you get it at the gate, etc. So contact your airline in advance. Sometimes they will give you a free upgrade to like premium economy, but you can't count on that. A lot of times you just might, the best they can do is just sort of closer to the front of the plane or closer to a bathroom. So I wouldn't assume anymore that you were going to get some kind of extra legroom just for being disabled. up until about 3 or 4 years ago, you could probably count on that. Now you cannot. And that is the reason why I hate that particular flight between Dallas and Tokyo, because there is no legroom on some of the particular planes that they run on that route. And you don't know which plane you're going to get until the day, because they do rotate them out. But ANA has fantastic legroom, even in coach class. So again, they are my favorite airline that flies to Japan. And it's always worth the extra money for me, because then I'm in less pain. So it may be worth considering whether you want to upgrade to like premium economy. Obviously, if you have the money or the points, it may be worth upgrading to business class, first class, whatever, depending on how much you're willing to spend. But I don't have the kind of money to fly first class, but I sometimes have the money to upgrade to premium economy. Sometimes it's a couple $100 more, but the difference in how much pain I will experience on the flight is sometimes worth that for me. Remember that when you're flying as a disabled person, to allow extra time before you go to the airport. If they say be there 2 hours before the flight, as a normal individual, I would get there 3 hours before. It takes extra time to get through security. You can have, sometimes you're just waiting around for the airport's assistance to get a wheelchair for you. It just takes extra time. And that is an important tip when we talk about transportation of all forms, is it's going to take you longer to find the right locations, to find the elevators and to get the correct security line and all that kind of thing. Know before you go, upon arrival, what you need to do at the airport when you land. So certainly in Tokyo, if that's where you're landing, then maybe you're picking up your SIM card or your pocket Wi-Fi. There may be other things that you need to do, like getting a Suica card or a Pasmo Pass. A bunch of beginning your trip to Japan starts at the airport. So as long as you are aware of that checklist of things that you need to do, you can find the locations of where they're going to be in the airport, and that may help save you time and certainly a lot of stress. If you've just been on board a flight for 13 hours, that is the last time you necessarily want to be panicking, because you can't find the ATM or you can't find the correct ticket machine. There's a bunch of different things that can go wrong when you're tired and have been awake for a very long time. So I would really plan that out well and truly in advance. Also, you might want to pre-arrange your transport to your accommodation. Certainly know how you're going to be going. If you are able to just take a regular train, know which train that is, know whether you need to pre-book a seat, because certainly the Narita Express, I didn't know, not only do you have to have a ticket, you have to pre-book a seat, which is an extra cost at certain hours of the day. And that can, be a surprise if you bought a ticket, but then all the seats are taken. You don't have to stand for an extra hour on the trip into Tokyo. See that our audience is mostly vanished now. So I do hope that if you have any questions, you will be able to ask. But if not, I will keep going through my list of tips and advice. And certainly people can always catch up on the replays later. Traveling within Japan, intercity, we have a bunch of different options. Obviously, everyone is familiar with the famous Japanese bullet trains, or Shinkansen. They do have wheelchair bays available in there, but also it's very inexpensive, and often the most accessible option would be to fly domestically. There are something like 84 different domestic airports within Japan, and certain places you can only really access by flight, especially if you're going all the way down to certain islands, like in Kyushu, Ryukyu. It's difficult to get there by train or by driving, but there are also, you could rent cars and drive if that's what you like to know or would like to do. Now, that's a bit beyond the scope of my expertise. We rented a car, but I've not rented an accessible vehicle. So I don't really know what the options are on that, but I certainly know that if you're going to a rural area, you may need your own vehicle, because it may be that the local city buses are not the most accessible. Josh did touch on the fact that in most major cities, the subway systems or metro systems, depending on where you're from, may determine the name that they are. Most of them are accessible at this point. It may be a little difficult finding where the elevators are. And I certainly have had the experience. I cut out part of that interview, but I told him I'd been to one station 3 times before I finally found where the elevators were. And so Josh gave me that tip. If you look at the tactile pavement, which is the bright yellow strip on the ground, that will usually lead you to the elevator. So even if you don't use tactile pavement, it can be a great signpost to find where an elevator is if you're struggling to find it. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail about this. There is a lot of information available on using particularly Tokyo Metro if you have disabilities. It's available on Accessible Japan. And there are 2 programs on NHK World that have been done, one with Josh and one with the person who created B-Maps, about how to navigate the subway system in Tokyo if you are a wheelchair user. And certainly I can answer your questions personally if you have any questions, but that could be like an hour-long program in and of itself. Josh did mention accessible taxis, and so that is certainly an option. The first time that my husband and I went to Japan, we were too intimidated by the train station. Back then they didn't have English signs, but now all the stations are marked in English. But back then they didn't have it. It was all in kanji, and to me it just looked squiggles on the wall, and I was just terrified. So we only took taxis the first time, and I find the taxis are affordable and accessible if you know how to book in advance. And so they're much better alternative than you might think if you're used to American taxi prices. Navigating around, that's kind of what we touched on in the interview as well, is that sometimes, well, GPS in Japan is kind of a nightmare anyway. Go back and look at some of my previous videos where I explain the challenges with trying to use GPS because it doesn't like finding where you are. The dot of "you are here" will just bounce around the map all over the place. But also, as we did touch upon, sometimes when you're looking at a map, it looks very straightforward, but when you get there, there are unexpected barriers. There may be stairs, there may be overpasses. So that's why the Wheel Log app is very helpful. Look and see how other people have navigated from point A to point B, and that can help you find where some of the hidden elevators are, where some of the hidden like tunnels or underpasses can be that can help you avoid some of the barriers that may otherwise be in your way. I will talk briefly. There are accessible tour programs. We will mention these a little bit later, but if you want to pre-book a 2-week tour that is fully accessible, that all the accommodation is already done for you, and that all the sites that you're going to are going to be accessible, there is one tour company that I can recommend, and it is called Inside Japan. They're a subdivision of Inside Asia. They are expensive though. There is no way to sugarcoat that. By the time that you are getting all fully accessible hotel rooms, the prices really add up. And as they've got accessible coaches for coach tours, you will be paying more money, but you already pay more money on an all-inclusive tour anyway. But then an all-inclusive tour that is fully accessible is going to be, 25% more expensive than an all-inclusive tour that is not accessible. There are also some day tours that are the same by Veltra, and they will have a private tour guide for you. So you'll have an accessible car. They will drive you to your location. They will act as a translator for you. But again, fairly substantial. And certainly if you're doing it every day, that would add up significantly. Finding accommodation. This is the most difficult part of it. I see that we don't have too many people here with us live at this point, which is understandable. We've been going for more than an hour now. But for those of you who are watching the replay, I will say this is the most difficult part of a trip to Japan. And this is where having assistance from groups like AccessibleJapancom and Tabbyfolk.com. There are also several Facebook groups for accessible travel. That is where reaching out to people is going to be very helpful. Of course, the first question on this list was, what do you need? If you only need to not have too many steps, maybe you can handle 1 step, then you can just look at the websites for the hotels. You can look at Google Street View to see the outside of the building and see if there's steps, going into one of the main doors, or if there's an alternate entrance. maybe you're fine. I mean, I've certainly have gone, I have never booked an accessible hotel room in any of the time that I've stayed in Japan because I don't happen to need that. But if you need a hoist, if you need, you know, special equipment for bathing. Most hotels will have shower chairs, but generally speaking, if you need extra machinery, then you're going to need very specific accommodation. And that's where it's very helpful to ask other people who have already been. And I find the community is very supportive and welcoming, and people are very happy to talk about their experiences. I know if it's a city that I've been to, I'm happy to tell you where I've stayed, how much I paid for it, etc. So feel free to ask. That is going to be your best method. But if you don't want to ask, or maybe you want to try looking around first, my first point of contact is always tripadvisor.com, because they do have a little checkbox for accessible hotel. And they have more than hotels. They have Airbnb, they have apartments, they have all kinds of alternate accommodations. But if you check accessible, then that doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's no real standard, but usually it means it'll be no stairs. I did mention in the chat earlier that another important keyword when you're searching is barrier-free. They might not use the word accessible in the English description, but in Japan in particular, they use the term barrier-free very commonly. So that is both for people who may have vision impairments and for people with mobility impairments. That is a very important keyword while you're searching. As Josh did mention, sometimes hotels have accessible rooms, but you can't book them through the website. You need to contact the hotel directly. This can often be done by email. They will usually be able to read your English and send you back some kind of sort of decent English in email in response, at least to say whether it's available, what the prices are, etc. But a lot of hotels do not allow people to just book the room over the internet, which is a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, it seems a little disappointing at first, but then you also realize that you're not getting people who don't actually need accessible rooms booking the accessible rooms. That's a problem we have in North America a lot, where you may need an accessible room and they've already rented it out to somebody else. That is less likely to happen. But also, again, as Josh mentioned, look at YouTube groups, look at guidebooks for senior citizens, look at other options. There are a lot of different ways to pre-scout out your potential. Again, I find just looking at TripAdvisor, usually it has photos of the room, photos of the bathroom. That gives me enough information as to whether it's going to work for me or not. But if you have more specialized needs, just ask people. They are, the Japanese government is really pushing to get the businesses to describe their accessible options, their accessibility features. And so hopefully by the time we're able to travel again, they will have more information on the websites available for you. Now, you may want to consider bringing some accessories with you to make your stays more comfortable. I always travel with my own pillows. Sometimes I travel with an air mattress. For instance, if I know I'm going someplace that has a futon accommodation, I will just bring a double height air mattress and a little battery operated pump to blow it up. And I will just stick that on top of the futon so that I don't have to be getting down on the floor. It's a way that I can still experience a traditional Japanese accommodation without having to hurt my knees all the time. So that may make a less accessible room more pleasant for you. And as long as you know what your needs are, there may be some workarounds for you. Showers are another thing that can be quite difficult in Japanese hotel rooms, but often the way that the bathroom is set up, you can shower outside the shower because it's a wet room. It was one of the things I did cut out of the interview, but Josh says often it's better to, ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. If you ask them in advance, can I shower sitting next to it? You've seen the drain on the floor. Sometimes it is intended for you to shower outside of the bathtub, and other times it's not, but there's usually a drain on the floor for overflow, in which case you may just use a handheld shower, just, sitting on the shower edge as opposed to, getting into the bathtub. So there are a lot of little workarounds and little tips that are available that can make your stay more pleasant and make your access a little bit easier. Medical needs. This can be a very tricky situation. First, I can't even say strongly, I absolutely 1000% suggest that you get travel insurance, because if you have any kind of complex health situation, you might never know when something is going to happen to you. And if something does happen, it can be very difficult and very expensive. Not nearly as expensive as coming to America without health insurance, but I really recommend that you get a travel insurance that does not exclude pre-existing conditions. Up until about 5 years ago, it was fairly difficult to get travel insurance that would cover a flare-up of an existing condition. And that's why I always use these two particular services, which are called Good Neighbor and World Nomad. They have policies up to a year if you're doing study abroad or things. But nowadays, I will just buy whatever travel insurance comes with my airline because they've stopped excluding pre-existing conditions. But whatever you do, please buy travel insurance. You don't want to have a health flare up in another country and then not be able to go to a doctor, because part of the services you're paying for in your travel insurance is you're going to have a phone number that you can call. They can help you find an English speaking doctor who can help you with what your flare up is. Now, taking medications in Japan, this can be quite a challenge because a lot of medications that are considered quite normal in the United States are completely prohibited in Japan. And then even if they're not prohibited, you may need a special license to bring them in. I do have this very long particular URL on the screen right now. We will have it available in the links afterwards. And also, if you go to Accessible Japan, AccessibleJapancom has a web page on bringing medicine that links to this page. I will say there's a list of 25 medications that are common in North America that are completely banned in Japan. Anything psychotropic, certainly there's some odd ones in there. There's a blood pressure medication that I took last year that's completely banned in Japan. So you need to take that list of banned medications to your doctor well in advance to make sure that you're not taking any of those, or if you are taking one of those, to see if they can provide you with an alternative and you can go through the changeover process before your trip. A lot of stimulant medications, which are very common in like ADHD, for treating ADHD in North America, those may be banned in Japan. Obviously, medical marijuana, including CBD, completely illegal in Japan. And then there's this whole list of other things. Sometimes they're used for epilepsy, sometimes they're used for neurological disorders. I don't understand the reason why these are banned. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you there is a list on that website that things you just cannot bring in. However, if you're going for more than 30 days and you have prescription medication, even if it is allowed, you have to get a license in advance. Let me back up for a moment. If you're bringing any prescription medication into Japan, when you first go to customs, as you're entering the country, you need to have a list of the medication and a doctor's signature on it. So either the original prescriptions or a letter. I usually get a letter from my doctor that's just got a list of all the medications that I'm bringing with a signature on it. And then you show those medications and that list to customs. So it needs to be in your hand luggage and you need to have it available as you're there to show them. Always take your medications in your hand luggage, even if you're not going through customs. You don't want it getting lost with your lost luggage. But have your medications and that list documentation for any prescription medication whatsoever. You do need to show that as you're going into Japan. You do not want to run the risk of getting arrested for having accidentally brought something in that you shouldn't be bringing in. But if you're going for more than 30 days, you have to apply for a special license. It is fairly easy to do. You just need to fill out all the documentation, send the documentation off by email, and then they will send you an email back with a little certificate that you print out, and then you bring that with you. Basically, they just want to be sure that the medication is prescribed for you. They need to know what you're taking it for, and they need to make sure that your doctor has signed off on that you have some kind of certification that it is a prescription as opposed to something that you picked up from somewhere else. Again, this is not a difficult process. It's just a step that is really important to take because Japan is very strict about bringing in unlicensed substances, and you really don't want to get in trouble with the government. You don't want to get arrested and go to jail just because you forgot to do the correct paperwork. Japan is the most strict out of all the countries that I've been to as far as bringing in prescription medication. Now, I haven't had a problem with most of my normal medications, including pain medications. But like I said, there was that one weird blood pressure medication that I used to take, and I would have had no idea that that would have been banned. So there's also an email address that you can contact if you're not sure if your medication is okay. It's the same one for the people who provide the license. If you want more information about that, you can contact me at any time. I can talk you through the process, but the webpage is actually quite self-explanatory. There's a very long PDF that explains the entire process to you. So if what you take is over-the-counter medication, I strongly encourage you to bring enough for your trip. Again, don't bring more than 30 days worth unless you're going to go through the process of getting that license. This applies even if it's over-the-counter medication. But if you normally take, say, ibuprofen or Aleve, naproxen, sodium, those may not be available in Japan, or you may not be able to read the Japanese labels at a pharmacy. So my husband forgot to bring his Aleve with him on one trip, and we would go to a pharmacy there, and they'd be like, well, we can only read the boxes for aspirin and Tylenol. And we couldn't find ibuprofen, we couldn't find naproxen sodium. Even though it would have been perfectly okay for us to bring them into the country, we just couldn't find them. So I strongly recommend, if you do take over-the-counter medication, bring enough with you for your trip. Always bring Imodium or some kind of antidiarrheal for traveler's diarrhea. You don't want your trip interrupted by that. And if you're drinking the tap water, which is perfectly safe, anytime you drink tap water in a country that you are not accustomed to, you will have diarrhea for about 24 hours. That is just part of the process. And if you've been to that country recently, you won't have to go through it again the next time. You know, your antibodies in your system will be used to those things in the water, amoeba and protozoa, for a couple of years. So if you go on a regular basis, you don't have to worry about it every single time. But if it's been 5 or more years since you've been to that country, just prepare for it. It's not a huge problem, and it's not even specifically related to people with disabilities or sensitive stomachs. It's something that everyone generally goes through. I did mention the English-speaking doctors. I will say, if it's a concern for you, look it up in advance. I can tell you right now where the areas in Tokyo are that have English-speaking hospitals, and there are actually expat communities that you can contact. Gaijinpot.com is a website that you can go on and say, hey, I'm in such and such a city, I need an English-speaking doctor. They don't necessarily get back to you quickly. That's why I recommend you ask them before you travel, so that you already know where the doctor is and what the phone number is, just in case you need them in the future. Now, a question a lot of people ask me, hi, for the people who have come back. I realize Twitch is having problems and it's probably been kicking you guys off. Thank you for the people who have come back. I know that several of you have in the past asked me about equipment rental, particularly wheelchairs, scooters. Some people do ask about hoists. That is a tricky situation in Japan. So you can rent manual wheelchairs, although in my experience, it's cheaper to just buy a manual wheelchair in your place of origin and take it with you. You can get some that are, if you have an attendant push, they're about $100, and then some of the ones that are self-propelled may only be a couple $100, but you'll pay a couple $100 to rent them. So, you know, you're not saving any money by renting it there. A power wheelchair, on the other hand, it's about $300 per week to rent, but the weight limits and the size limits on the ones that are available in Japan are quite small, especially if you're carrying luggage or something like that with you. The wheelchairs that I am aware of that you can rent on a weekly or monthly basis, the maximum weight on those is 165 pounds. So remember, that's you, your clothing, your purse or backpack, your luggage if you're trying to, you know, navigate with luggage or hand luggage on the way from the airport and back. So if all of that totals less than 165 pounds, then you'll be okay. But if you're over that amount, it may be tricky, and it may be worth renting something in your home to take it with you. That's a tricky situation. It may be something that you just have to make a decision about. I will say that there is one company that I know of that does rent scooters, you know, the large mobility scooter type things, but Japan doesn't really accept scooters as much. They're larger. They're not required to take scooters on buses and trains. They're required to take power wheelchairs, but they're not required by law to take scooters. It may be harder to get them into restaurants or other locations, sightseeing facilities. So I personally would not recommend renting a scooter if you have the option to go with the wheelchair. But there is one company that I know of, well, that I knew of before the pandemic. I don't know if they'll still be in business by 2021, where you can rent a scooter if that is absolutely what you need. I do also know that if you need hoists and things like that, you can rent hoists, but for hygiene issues, you usually have to provide your own straps or buy straps. You can often get shower chairs, but you cannot get commode chairs. Again, for hygiene issues, you can't return a commode chair or a toilet chair afterwards. That would be something that you would just have to purchase and dispose of at the end of your trip. If you do have any questions about any of this, feel free to pop your questions in the chat, or you can email me or contact Josh on Accessible Japan at any time in the future. I know that Accessible Japan actually has a page that is just rental request forms. So you put in what it is that you're looking to rent and what city, and then Josh or other members of staff can go and see if they have the information for where that can be rented. So that is my #1 tip, because like I know a couple of websites right now, but it does change on a year-by-year basis as far as who's actually available to rent to tourists. You have to realize that most of the rentals in Japan are geared toward locals. And so, you know, you obviously want an English-speaking company. And so I could tell you 2 names right now, but you don't know if a year from now, if that's going to be available for you. As Timmy says, scooters can be left outside of stores. The theft is not a big problem. That's true of wheelchairs as well. It is a little bit panic-inducing to leave a very valuable piece of equipment just sitting on the sidewalk, but it is absolutely safe. So you don't have to worry about anyone trying to run off with it. It's not like in the United States. It's nerve-wracking, but perfectly acceptable. So if you are able to get up from the scooter and go into a small shop or into a shrine or something like that, you can just park it. There'll usually be a line of strollers parked there as well, and it won't be a problem. Let's move on a little bit. So sightseeing, I'm not actually going to mention a whole lot, just because by now you already know about Accessible Japan, you know about Accessible Japan's Guide to Tokyo, and you already know about TripAdvisor.com, which will have accessibility checkboxes while you're doing searches. So those are the top tips for finding locations that are accessible. Again, if there is something that you really want to see, and you want to know if it's accessible, maybe there's a particular shrine or a particular store, ask on a forum. Ask on Facebook, ask on Accessible Japan, ask me, maybe I've been there. You may find places that say 85% of the facility is accessible. So Osaka Castle, the main tower museum part is fantastic. There, you have to have a special code to use the elevator. Please don't tell the code to able-bodied people. That's how you reserve it for those of us who need it. But you can get inside that castle very conveniently. It's a little tricky on the observation deck, but the actual castle part, the museum part, is fine. But the outbuildings, which are original, have lots and lots and lots of stairs. So maybe you can only see part of the facility, but a lot of museums tend to be accessible. Shrines, maybe, there's some shrines that have really gone the extra mile to add in a bunch of wheelchair lifts. The photograph that was the promotion for this particular episode was from Narita-san Shrine in Narita, which is the city near Narita Airport. Yeah, as Misty says, sometimes they have someone handling the elevator. Osaka Castle, they do. They have a lift operator, as we would say in Britain. There's someone who, will be driving it for you so that they're certain that only people who need it can get into it. That's not necessarily the case in most other places. But yeah, there are a lot of places that may be accessible except for a small area or except for this other thing. So Sensoji Temple in Asakusa, which I know is Josh's favorite, he takes every camera crew, every television crew with him to Sensoji to show off their accessible features. But there is one building, which is, if you want the Goshuin, the stamp, the pilgrim stamp, that is not accessible. There's 8 steps to get into that building. So you'd have to send somebody else in to get a Goshuin stamp for you, but the rest of the shrine is completely accessible. So just be aware that there may be a few areas that you can't get to, even for a place that is listed as accessible. Now, I did mention earlier, and this is where I will repeat it, there are 2 tour companies, Inside Japan and Veltra, that have accessible tours or accessible day trips. Now, there may be other day trips that you want to go on through JTB, which is the Japan Travel Bureau's, I mean, it's probably the most common day trips. We took a couple of them, going to Mount Fuji or going up to Ashikaga Flower Park. And a lot of those bus tours are not accessible buses. Now, it may be that you don't need an accessible bus, and that would be fine for you. Certainly, we would just usually take my rollator and fold it up, and that wasn't a problem. But, you know, if you need the accessible bus or an accessible taxi or an accessible driver, I really recommend looking first at Veltra and Inside Japan. And even if you're not planning on going on one of the Inside Japan tours, I just take a look at the list of places where they're taking you, and then you're like, okay, I know that one's accessible. But sometimes museums and sightseeing attractions will have wheelchairs that you can borrow there. So maybe you don't need it full time, but you just need it for a few hours while you're on site. So I've seen that in many places, even in Oita, Takasakiyama Mountain, which is a monkey preserve, one of Timmy's favorite places with wild monkeys everywhere. They had power wheelchairs that you could borrow while you were on site. So, you know, that could be another alternative. Maybe you're someone who can walk most of the time, but you can't really manage to go all the way around a museum. It may take a few hours. There can be a wheelchair that you can borrow. Also, top tip, IKEA has them. So if you're going to IKEA in Japan or anywhere else, you can always borrow a wheelchair there. And I think that is the end of no, we still have food and dining to cover. Again, Josh mentioned this in the interview. If you need a fully accessible restaurant, and by fully accessible, we mean no steps, and they can remove a seat so that you can pull your wheelchair up into the table. The 3 places that we recommend looking are the apps, which are called B Maps, Weelog. Actually, there's an exclamation mark on the end of Weelog. I've had that in the chat earlier, but Weelog exclamation mark, and Guru Navi. Guru Navi, you may hear a lot of people in Japan saying, oh, I always check Tabbyfolk for restaurants. Well, Guru Navi and Tabbyfolk are the same company, but Tabbyfolk does not have an English interface. So Guru Navi takes the information from Tabbyfolk. That's why, honestly, everyone who goes to Japan is looking for restaurants probably uses Guru Navi. Yelp also has a lot of information. They may not be the best about having information about whether it's accessible or not, but B Maps and Weelog are specifically for access, disability access, and the Guru Navi has a selection that you can choose to search for an accessible location. Now, for people who have food allergies, my top tip is to print out a card that has your specific food allergies on it. I'm allergic to octopus, which makes Osaka very challenging because Osaka loves their taco. Taco, T-A-K-O, not taco as in Taco Tuesdays. But I can't eat that, so I have a little card printed out saying I cannot eat mollusks. And I have to explain what a mollusk is because they don't know what that is either. I recommend, there are several different websites that you can go to, but justhungry.com's Japan Dining Out card is they give you a little PDF that you can print out, and it's completely free. It has a little, there's a blank one where you can write your own things on there. But if you have a complicated food allergy like mine, you might want to go to one of the other services that they will provide a translation service. So you pay about $10 for the service, but they will take your food allergy list, they'll translate it into Japanese for you, and then they'll send you a card that is pre-printed. Just show that to your server or chef at a restaurant, and they will hopefully be able to help you avoid any of the allergens that you are trying to stay away from. You may want to consider having an apartment accommodation, or as what we'd say in the UK, self-catering accommodation, so that you can make your own meals. You can go to a grocery store and cook for yourself, buy yourself a nice little rice cooker way over there, bring it back to America. That's what we did. Again, I'm sure Timmy will be happy to brag about our fabulous mint green rice cooker. But that may, if you really have difficult issues, it may be that you just need to cook from scratch yourself, which is perfectly fine and a great way to get in touch with the local day-to-day culture, shopping in a supermarket, learning what the hours are, learning what the foods look like in their raw format. Spoiler alert, they wrap everything in plastic, even the fruits and vegetables. They're very hygienic, but they're very not necessarily environmentally friendly. But you might want to consider an apartment if you need to be very specific about every single ingredient that is going into your body. If that's not your concern, most convenience stores, I use the word kombini because that is the word that they use in Japan, but most convenience stores are fully wheelchair accessible and are quite accommodating for people with a variety of disabilities. And you can buy just about anything there. All the meals, pre-prepared meals, they are excellent. They're top quality. Do not think it's anything like American convenience stores, except Buc-ee's. If you're thinking Buc-ee's, you're on the right track, where the food is wonderful, it's fresh, it's delicious. I can eat at a kombini for every meal for about a month, and I have. So really, there are options available for you. So again, even if you feel like that's going to be your primary obstacle, do contact us and we will help you sort that out. And again, I'm just going to wrap this up with the contact information. So remember that Josh Grisdale is available at accessible-japan.com and tabbyfolk.com. And he's available at Accessible Japan on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. He's not on Facebook as much as the others, but certainly on Twitter, he usually gets back to you within 24 hours. And if you post in the forum, either he or other members of the community will get back to you. Again, usually I get a response within 24 hours. Just remember that there's a weird time difference. So, it's about 5 in the morning in Japan right now. Sometimes you have to wait 12 to 15 hours before someone's awake to answer your question, but I find that I've never had a question go unanswered. Even if the answer is, I don't really know, they're still going to spend some time and try to help you and try to provide resources as best they possibly can. And you can always contact me. Again, remember that I have several social media handles, but Julianne in Japan is both my email and my Instagram, or you can contact us through Okashicon at any time. That wraps up this presentation for today. I thank you, those of you who have been with us the entire time, and for people who may have come in late, I would encourage you to go back and watch the replays that will be available later on YouTube and the Okashicon website. And certainly the Okashicon website will have one that has repaired the slight video glitch that we had earlier in the broadcast. I realize that today has been a challenging day for internet for all of us, and I certainly thank you for being with us. Please do remember that you can sign up for the Okashicon mailing list, and we will be sending out monthly newsletters to say what's coming up on all of our Okashicon online presentations, whether it's J-Fashion, arts and crafts, travel, games, music, or more. And thank you again for being with us. We will see you again next month at Japan Stories, where I'll be interviewing Rob of The Real Japan about getting off the beaten path, outside of the Golden Route, and into rural Japan, even if you don't speak a word of Japanese. So I'll see you next month, and I will also see you on the 10th of May for Make Your Monday, where we'll be learning origami and small accessories, jewelry accessories. So see you later. Come back tonight at 7 o'clock for the demo disc guys doing hunt night. See ya. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, this is Raphael Coronelli, writer of a bunch of stuff. But last year, I spent nearly a month traveling through northern Japan, from Hokkaido south to Tokyo. This year, for obvious reasons, I didn't have a chance to go back, so I wrote a book about the experience called How to Have an Adventure in Northern Japan. It's sort of a memoir, sort of a guide, but really the goal was to create something that could help people who can't travel to Japan right now feel like they are, and maybe plan for when things are safer again and we can go back. The response to the book has been great, and one of my favorite things I'm hearing is exactly what I'd hoped. That through my stories and photography, people are able to transport themselves into the north of Japan at a time when, unfortunately, we can't travel. I'm feeling optimistic about the new year, and I hope that wherever you are, you're staying safe and getting ready for when we can all travel and have fun in Japan again. Let's make it a great 2021, and I hope that my book, How to Have an Adventure in Northern Japan, can help you get there. Wherever you are in the world, akemashite omedetou gozaimasu.
Hello, everybody. This is Peter. Everybody have happy holidays. Okay, stay safe. Wash your hands. Yeah. All right.